The lights inside the packed auditorium glared down on the polished stage where two podiums stood like dueling fortresses. On one side, Senator John Thune, tall and calculating, exuded the air of a man who lived and breathed Washington strategy. His voice had always been one of measured reason, a careful blend of numbers, projections, and long-term chess moves that kept the Senate GOP orbit steady. On the other stood Governor Greg Abbott, calm in his chair yet radiating the grit of Texas resilience. Unlike Thune, Abbott didn't lean on spreadsheets or polished talking points. He leaned on lived experience, on the roar of Texans who had rallied behind him in times of crisis, and on a conviction that leadership meant more than numbers on a chart. The topic of the night, the future of the Republican Party and the presidency. From the moment the moderator introduced the debate, tension vibrated through the room. Thune wasted no time sharpening his attack. "Governor Abbott," he began, voice steady but edged with disdain, "I admire your passion, but passion doesn't win elections. Delegates do. Electoral math does. The path to the White House is built on calculations, numbers, not slogans. And by those numbers, your vision simply doesn't add up." The audience murmured. Some nodded at the cold, logical delivery. Others bristled, sensing the jab. Abbott didn't flinch. He simply folded his hands calmly, eyes locked on Thune, letting the senator's words hang heavy in the air. Then, with a faint smile, Abbott leaned into the microphone. "Senator, you've got numbers. I've got people. And last I checked, it's people who cast the votes, not your calculator." The crowd erupted, cheers rolling like thunder across the hall. The stage was set. The clash wasn't just Abbott versus Thune. It was Texas grit versus Washington math, and the whole country was watching. Thune adjusted his tie, unshaken by Abbott's first punch. He leaned forward, his voice sharp, carrying the weight of a Senate veteran who had navigated decades of political calculations. "Governor, slogans are fine for rallies," he said, "but when it comes to the presidency, the math is brutal. You need 270 electoral votes. Texas gives you 40. Add Oklahoma, Arkansas, maybe Louisiana, that's not even 70. Meanwhile, Democrats lock down California, New York, Illinois. You talk about people, but I talk about paths. And by every path I see, your road to the White House ends in a dead end." The audience gasped lightly. Even supporters in Abbott's corner shifted uncomfortably, wondering how he'd respond to the senator's precise arithmetic. Thune pressed the advantage, rattling off polling data, delegate counts, and vote histories with the ease of a man who had lived inside the numbers for years. But Abbott didn't blink. He waited until Thune finished his monologue, then spoke with deliberate calm. "Senator, you're right about one thing, math matters. But here's what you're missing. People change the math. In 2016, every expert said the numbers didn't work for Trump. And yet, millions of Americans showed up because they wanted change. They broke your precious equations. You think you can predict the future with a spreadsheet? Try telling that to a rancher in Texas who's watching Washington ignore his border town. Or a small business owner crushed by California-style regulations. Those people don't care about your equations. They care about who's willing to fight for them." The crowd roared. Shouts of "That's right" echoed across the hall. Abbott's words had transformed Thune's cold math into something lifeless, sterile, disconnected from reality. Abbott leaned forward, his voice dropping to a razor's edge. "You can calculate all you want, Senator. But when America is hurting, it's not equations that rise up, it's people. And they're ready to rewrite your numbers." The hall shook with applause, while Thune tightened his jaw, realizing Abbott had turned his strength into a weakness. The moderator tried to calm the roaring crowd, but the energy in the hall had shifted. Thune, sensing he was being cornered, raised his voice, letting a rare flash of irritation slip into his polished demeanor. "Governor, it's easy to dismiss math when you don't understand the stakes," Thune said sharply. Elections are not won by sound bites or defiance. They're won by strategy, by mastering the rules of the game. You may fire up a crowd in Texas, but the White House requires Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Do you even have a plan to flip those states, or are you just betting on blind passion? Abbott's eyes narrowed slightly, but his composure never cracked. He tilted his head, almost amused. Then his voice dropped into a calm, unhurried drawl that cut deeper than a shout ever could. Senator, you talk about the game like it's a chessboard. But here's the truth, Americans aren't pawns in Washington's game. They're people. People who've been ignored while politicians like you counted and calculated every angle. You're so busy adding up columns that you forgot to listen to the voices behind them. The audience erupted again, louder this time. A chant of Abbott. Abbott swelled, bouncing off the auditorium walls. Abbott leaned forward, his tone sharper now. You call it blind passion. I call it conviction. Conviction built on real fights, securing the border, protecting businesses, standing for life and liberty. You want to lecture me about Wisconsin? Tell that to the factory worker who's sick of being told by DC elites what his future looks like. You can't spreadsheet away his frustration. You can't calculate away his pride. That's not math, Senator. That's America. Thunderous applause shook the hall. Thune stood stiff, jaw tight, realizing that while his arguments were sound, they lacked the raw force of Abbott's connection with the people. The battle lines were clear. Washington's polished strategist versus Texas's unyielding fighter. The moderator, sensing the debate was escalating into something bigger than scheduled, tried to rein in the fire. But it was too late. The audience was leaning forward, hungry for every word, knowing they were watching a clash that could shape the party's future. Thune straightened his shoulders, his voice rising above the cheers. Governor Abbott, conviction without calculation is reckless. You think passion alone wins elections? That's a fantasy. The presidency demands discipline. You can't just storm the gates with emotion, you have to build the numbers, county by county, delegate by delegate. That's how Reagan won. That's how Bush won. And unless you understand that, you will never win. The words cut sharp, evoking memories of Republican icons. Some in the crowd nodded. But Abbott's expression didn't waver. He waited until the murmurs quieted, then spoke with the patience of a man who had faced storms bigger than a Senate speech. Senator, you're right, Reagan and Bush did win with discipline. But they also won because they inspired people. People didn't rally to Reagan because he showed them a calculator. They rallied because he gave them hope, strength, and a vision of America they believed in. You call my conviction reckless. I call it leadership. And leadership isn't about playing by Washington's rulebook. It's about writing a new one. The crowd exploded in applause, some on their feet, others chanting Abbott's name. The energy drowned out Thune's cool logic, making his equations feel hollow. Abbott's voice cut through the roar, calm but commanding. You can keep counting delegates, Senator. I'll keep counting hearts. And when November comes, we'll see which one America follows. The arena shook with thunderous applause. Thune's jaw tightened. He had wanted to make Abbott look small, but in that moment, it was his own reliance on cold arithmetic that seemed small in the face of Texas grit. The tension in the room was electric now. Supporters were shouting, cameras flashing, the moderators struggling to keep the debate on track. But John Thune wasn't ready to let Abbott steal the stage completely. He adjusted his papers and leaned into the microphone with the sharpness of a man who knew this moment could define him. Governor Abbott, Thune said firmly, it's convenient to talk about hope and conviction. But let me remind you, we've lost elections before because we let emotion overrule strategy. Democrats calculate. They target swing states. They fundraise in the right counties. Meanwhile, we keep pretending slogans and rallies are enough. If you lead this party without discipline, you'll hand the White House to the left on a silver platter. There were nods from a portion of the audience, Republicans who feared losing again in 2024. Thune's words carried weight, but before they could settle, Abbott's steady voice cut in, low and commanding. Senator, you just proved my point. You see elections as numbers on a scoreboard. But Americans see elections as battles for their future. When parents are worried about what their kids are being taught in schools, when ranchers are fighting for their land at the border, when small businesses are crushed by inflation, they're not asking about delegate math. They're asking, who's going to fight for me? That's the real calculation, Senator. And I've been fighting that fight every single day. The audience thundered with applause, some standing to clap, others chanting Abbott's name. Abbott's tone sharpened, each word striking like a hammer. You say Democrats calculate? Then let them. Because no calculation, no formula, no pollster can measure what happens when Americans rise up together. That's not reckless, that's unstoppable. The hall roared. For the first time that night, Thune's confidence wavered, his polished logic struggling against the raw storm Abbott had unleashed. Thune's jaw tightened as the hall thundered with applause for Abbott. He wasn't used to losing control of the narrative, but Abbott's blend of grit and conviction had shifted the energy in the room. Still, Thune wasn't about to surrender. Governor, Thune said, his tone edged with urgency, the presidency isn't about fiery speeches. It's about winning. And winning requires discipline. You keep talking about passion as though it's a substitute for hard numbers. But let me ask you this, how many counties in Pennsylvania do you need to flip? How many in Michigan? What's your ground game in Wisconsin? If you can't answer those questions, then you're not serious about leading this party. The audience fell silent, waiting to see how Abbott would handle the challenge. Abbott leaned back slightly, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. His voice came slow, deliberate, and razor-sharp. Senator, you want numbers? I'll give you one. 35. That's how many counties I won in Texas border regions, counties Democrats thought they owned. Do you know how I did it? Not by running numbers. By showing up. By listening. By standing shoulder to shoulder with people Washington forgot. That's the real ground game. The hall erupted again. People stood, clapping, shouting Abbott's name. Abbott leaned forward, voice growing stronger with each word. You keep asking me about Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Here's my answer, people are fed up in every state, Senator. Fed up with Washington politicians who treat them like figures in a ledger. You think you're exposing my weakness by asking for numbers. But you're exposing your own, because you forgot the one truth you can't calculate, Americans are tired of being numbers. They're ready to be heard. The applause was deafening now, the crowd surging with Abbott's words. Thune's carefully rehearsed arithmetic suddenly looked small against the tidal wave of Texas grit. Thune's polished confidence began to crack. For years, he had been the embodiment of discipline and quiet calculation within the GOP, but Abbott's fiery authenticity was landing blow after blow. The senator tried once more to claw back the moment, his tone sharp, almost desperate. Governor Abbott, Thune snapped, you can whip up a crowd, but whipping up a crowd doesn't win a general election. Do you even realize the damage you're doing to this party by pretending enthusiasm alone is enough? We've lost too much ground already. If we gamble everything on your rhetoric without strategy, we'll hand Democrats another 4 years in the White House. The jab stung some in the audience, Republicans wary of another loss. But Abbott didn't flinch. He leaned into the microphone, his tone calm but burning with conviction. Senator, what damages this party isn't conviction. It's fear. Fear of losing. Fear of being bold. Fear of stepping outside Washington's little playbook. That's why people are leaving us behind. Because they see leaders like you more worried about calculations than courage. The hall thundered with applause, the chant, Abbott. Abbott. Abbott, swelling like a drumbeat of defiance. Abbott's eyes locked on Thune as he delivered the line that silenced even the doubters. You say I gamble with rhetoric. But I've spent my life fighting storms, disasters, border crises, attacks on our values. That's not rhetoric, Senator, that's reality. And reality always beats theory. The crowd roared, many now on their feet, waving flags and cheering. Thune gripped the edges of his podium, realizing the narrative had slipped completely from his control. His cool math was no match for Abbott's storm of grit and resolve. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a reckoning between Washington's caution and Texas's courage. The air in the auditorium was thick, every word landing heavier than the last. Senator Thune gripped the sides of his podium, his voice trembling just enough to reveal the pressure he felt. Governor Abbott, he said, forcing calm into his tone, you make a good show of defiance. But the presidency isn't a rally in Texas. It's the biggest stage in the world. And if you think you can lead this nation without discipline, without data, without calculation, you're not only fooling yourself, you're fooling these people. Boos rippled through the crowd, directed at Thune's condescending tone. Abbott remained still, letting the reaction speak before he leaned into the mic, his voice measured but full of steel. Senator, the difference between us is simple. You think leadership means playing by Washington's rules. I think leadership means breaking them when they fail the people. You think America is a chessboard. I think it's a heartbeat. And right now, that heartbeat is tired of Washington politicians who calculate more than they care. The audience erupted, chants of Abbott. Abbott, echoing like a drumline. Abbott raised a hand, calming them, his tone shifting from fiery to deeply personal. You want to lecture me about the presidency being the biggest stage in the world? Let me tell you something. I've led through hurricanes. I've led through blackouts. I've led through border crises when Washington abandoned us. That wasn't a stage, it was survival. And survival teaches you something no calculator ever can. When people are hurting, they don't need equations. They need courage. The hall shook with thunderous applause. Some people stood, waving flags, while others clapped so hard their hands reddened. Thune's face stiffened, his polished arguments couldn't match the raw human truth Abbott had just unleashed. This wasn't just Abbott answering Thune anymore. It was Abbott answering Washington itself. The auditorium felt like it was trembling under the weight of Abbott's words. Supporters chanted, flags waved, and the moderators struggled to keep order. Senator Thune's polished composure had all but evaporated, his once steady hands gripping the podium like a lifeline. Governor Abbott, Thune fired back, his tone sharp but tinged with desperation, your speeches may win cheers, but cheers don't win elections. We've seen what happens when Republicans confuse energy for strategy, we lose. And if you keep pushing this reckless approach, you'll doom this party to defeat. The words echoed, but instead of applause, the crowd answered with loud boos. The tide had turned completely. Thune looked around, realizing he was no longer addressing an audience, he was battling a movement. Abbott leaned forward, his voice calm yet commanding, slicing through the noise like a blade. Senator, you call it reckless because you've forgotten what courage looks like. You want to play safe, I want to fight to win. And here's the truth, people don't rally to calculators, they rally to conviction. They don't follow math, they follow strength. And strength has never come from Washington, it's come from the heart of America. The hall erupted, louder than ever before. The chant of Abbott. Abbott drowned out any attempt Thune made to respond. The senator's shoulders slumped slightly, the confidence that carried him into the debate shattered by Abbott's relentless storm of grit and fire. Abbott delivered the final blow of the night, his voice steady as stone. You want numbers, Senator? Here's the only one that matters, millions. Millions of Americans who are ready to rise up and take back their country. That's my strategy. And no spreadsheet in Washington can stop it. The room shook with thunderous applause. Thune stared down at his notes, his carefully crafted strategy reduced to ash in the face of Abbott's unbreakable conviction. The moderator tried one last time to restore order, but the hall was already Abbott's. Supporters were on their feet, the air buzzing with chants and applause that refused to die down. John Thune, once the image of calculation and composure, now stood diminished, his arguments buried beneath Abbott's storm of conviction. Abbott raised a hand, and slowly, the crowd settled. His voice carried steady, every word sharp, clear, and unforgettable. Senator Thune, you came here tonight to prove that math beats grit. That Washington's formulas beat Texas's fight. But what you forgot is this: America has never been moved by spreadsheets. It's been moved by courage. By men and women who refused to bow, refused to calculate their way to freedom, and instead fought for it. The audience erupted, but Abbott pressed on, his tone now almost solemn. You can outcalculate me 1,000 times over. But you can't outfight me. And you can't outfight the millions of Americans who are done being reduced to numbers on your page. They're not numbers, they're voices, and they're roaring tonight louder than ever before. The chant of Abbott, Abbott, shook the rafters, echoing like thunder. Thune lowered his gaze, his silence confirming the night's verdict. Abbott finished with a single line that would be replayed on every news broadcast and social media feed in the hours to come. Senator, you can keep your calculator. I'll keep the people. And in the end, the people always win. The hall erupted one final time, a deafening ovation that left no doubt: Abbott had not only won the debate, he had defined it.